Hi, good morning, guys. There's some a glitch, I guess, and I'm just going to sort it out. Give me a couple of minutes. This is Mahesh, your trainer. I hope I am audible and you can hear me. Okay. Now, instead of putting in the question answer window, if you can just put it in the chat window, it would be helpful. I mean, whatsoever your answers are, if you can just put it in the chat window, it would be really great. Oh, is it? Okay, I did not know that. Fine. No problem, no problem. Okay. Just give me a minute. No, the session has not started yet, Pooja. Okay. Let's do one thing. So, all of you are here for the 10 o'clock session, right? Which is specifically for design and prototyping, the SCG sessions, HGC sessions. Correct. Okay. Okay. So, okay. So I'm just confirming that, last batch or last discussion we had was like a couple of weeks ago. Okay. There was a first session that we have had. And then after that, I guess there was some gap in between. And then this is the second session in the series that we have. So normally in a in a small group session, we have some what we call it as some cap of students. And what I see is right now some more number of students are there. So I'm just trying to confirm how many are supposed to be there. Just a minute. Okay, I just confirmed that I guess there is some scheduling a problem. Okay, so what has happened was that invite was sent to I guess multiple batches. The same invite was sent to multiple batches. So okay, so let's do one thing. Since you all are here, let's do it more like a live session. Okay, and let's continue the topic. Okay, so there's no point in you can say now rescheduling everything. So let's continue doing the same thing. The only thing is like normally in a small group session, what we have is we have a what we call as typical one-to-one kind of a talk. Okay, and right now since we have like how many 45 students also, let's do it more like a live session. So in case there is a concern that you have, just feel free to put up like raise your hand, start talking about it, and then we can very well maybe handle the session that way. Okay guys, so let's continue since all of you are here for the same kind of a session. So we can handle it. Okay, give me a minute again. So let's continue that way. Let me start sharing my screen with you. Okay. Rather, let me start sharing whiteboard with you. Okay. And let's continue this way. Let me know if at all whiteboard is visible. Can the chat be enabled or the audio be enabled for us to discuss you just like last session? Anukul, the scheduling part is something which is scheduled that way that I, I mean, I myself may not be able to do anything. I reverted to the scheduler, but there's no response. Okay, I got 2 questions invite. Okay, that's fine. So let's do one thing. Let's try to get more out of this discussion. Okay, so we are already 15 minute, I can say, at loss. So let's do one thing. Let's continue the discussion. If there are concerns, questions, queries we have, we can very well figure it out through the chat window itself or through Q&A itself. Okay, Anukul? Aditya, yes, I got you got a 2 invite. Rather, many of you got many invites, and then many of you have joined this session. But then this is something because it was wrongly sent invite. But since you are here, let's continue. No issues. Okay. So what I have here, I have this chat window. I have this what we call as Q&A window, and under the Q&A window, what we can do is we can always have a what we call it as discussion. Okay. So let's continue now. I hope now the what we call as whiteboard is there, and I must be audible at this moment. And we all in all, including me, there are 49 participants. That's something to just confirm. Okay, and the session is all about something called as prototyping. Okay, so prototyping, and when it comes to a design. So in general, the stages that you may have gone through, so there are like several stages that typically we go through. Okay, so we go through something which is called as let me put it here. So we go to something which is called as a requirement gathering first. Okay, we already know that. Just to bring all of you in same line, or just to ensure that we are on same page, we have requirement and rather requirement gathering first to be done. Then after requirement gathering, what we do is we do the analysis of the requirement. Okay, so they can be requirement analysis after that. After that, then what we typically do is something that is, I would say, we do the design. Okay, and then in the design, there are, you can say, two parallel streams that can continue running inside a company. So I would say simple design over here, but whether it is UI design or what we call it as architectural design, that is something we can take a call, I can say, based on the team itself. Then there is next thing that we typically go with is something like, you can say, you go for coding. Okay, so you code. I just mentioned here, you go through coding. And then finally, what we do is we do the, what we call it, like developer, they themselves can do the UT itself. Okay, so while coding, developer can do the unit testing itself. And then finally, we do kind of, you can say, testing, which can be load, which can be what we call it as uh, uh, rather overall testing, UI testing. All that part is something which can be done later on. So they can be finally, maybe let's say a testing over here. Then they can be something which can be deployment. Okay, now deployment can happen in several phases over here. They can be staging, ready deployment. They can be production deployment too. Okay, so staging, then there is something called as production, which means really actual environment. Staging can be some dummy environment that we can go with. And finally, based on the requirement, there can be some changes handled. So they can be maintenance of the application that you do. And the entire cycle, based on the need, we can just keep on repeating. Okay, let's put here requirement gathering over here. So, so sorry. So what happens here is this, that by default, when we start taking the requirement, what we discussed in the last session was like, how do you gather the requirement? So generally, while you gather the requirement, we can go through several things. So one can be something like we can go with let's say in here itself, maybe I'll just put it in different font. Okay, so let me put here, let me put some different color. Yeah. So during requirement gathering, what you can do is you can actually have some sort of, you can say, stakeholders interviews. Okay, they can be something which can be let's say user interviews, which means actual users you can target to, and you can always go for maybe interviews, so that what sort of things whatever you plan versus what user wants, or whatever you plan and whatever stakeholder wants, there should not be any kind of a gap in between. So whatever stakeholder wants, who are the stakeholders? They can be stakeholders like, people who put in their money to basically develop that product. They can be people who are maybe domain experts and who have already worked in that domain or that particular what we call it as area, and then they are just going to go and give you some inputs. They can be so-called, you can say, final users as well, whom the application is actually targeting to. And then there can be a variety of different users. If one user is administrator user, other user can be the user. Okay, they can be 3 4 type of users, let's say, for your application itself. Like example wise, if I take Swiggy, it can be a delivery boy, can be a user of a Swiggy application. Me myself, or you yourself as in the end user of the Swiggy application, and they can be the Swiggy administration team, which can be another, you can say, part in here. So here if I and maybe here itself, if we can identify maybe 3 different users are there, ultimately from the 3 different user perspective, what we can say is what are their views about, you can say, the planned application, what they would expect from that application is something we can get to know by doing some interviews. Now sometimes it happens that you may not find actual users giving you the what we call as information. Then you can actually have some sort of, you can say, mock interviews as well, which means you can actually have some sort of dummy users put up, and considering maybe somebody from a team itself acting as a final user also, you can have those dummy interviews. And because these are real people who may or may not be using that application, but at least when you put them into the user shoes, in that case, can they identify, can they visualize, can they maybe get to know what exactly you're trying to do, and can they actually go and maybe, let's say, give some inputs. So you can also do something which is called as mock interviews as well. Okay, so that is something which we typically do. Now these interviews can be done, you can say, on plain paper. These interviews can be some video recordings. Okay, which means you can actually record a video, because then the final stakeholders may say that rather may not say that I never said this, because that way you will have it in recorded format, and in case required to, I can say, go through that same sort of, you can say, interview process again, you can very well listen to the recording itself. So that is something which we, in which way we keep on gathering the requirement. There can be some sort of, it's a surveys that we can conduct. Okay, if it's a mass kind of you can say product or mass targeting product, one can very well go and do the surveys as well, which can be something which can be offline and online kind of a surveys that we can do. Okay, and we can just have maybe a right kind of a data collected that way. Now this can be on paper, this can be on, as I said, over the videos as well. Now once it's done, this is what we discussed last time. So once we have the requirement gathered, okay, what we can do is we can actually go for something which is called as be going for something which is called as use case diagrams. Okay, so from the UML perspective, we can actually go for something which is called as use case diagram. So we identify out here something which is called as use case over here. So in use cases, I should put here use case diagram, wherein you identify the actual users and their actions. Okay, so you identify what exactly users are and what exactly is their actions are, so that you can actually just get it confirmed, get it so called, you can say, cleared, that what exactly users do and what exactly their actions should be. Again, normally what is suggested is once you are I would say, once you have this use case drawn, or once you have this requirement gathering phase done, normally what we do is we generally um, take a sign off from the, you can say, end customer or a client, which means sign off for one phase. That is, okay, we gathered your requirements in the correct manner. Like we identify the users, final users of the application, And we also identified something which is called as their actions. That's what we typically confirm from the end customer. Once user confirms that yes, this is exactly what our intention was, and this is what you have identified in a correct manner. So once your use case is what we called as done, then what we typically do is we go with something which is called as requirement analysis. Okay. So in the requirement analysis phase, what we generally do is something like you can say like multiple things that we can do in this phase itself. Okay. So something like you can say we can actually like once this use case flow is all developed, which means this particular part happens out here. Okay. While we do here. So use cases and let's say maybe actions are already identified once you have gathered the requirement. Okay. Now the next thing which happens out here is we also like we have to put it in legal language, which means putting some sort of, you can say, vague and non-technical language will not help. Putting some technical language will definitely help in this case. Now you don't only identify users and actions, you also design the flow as well, which means here itself you may plan to design something which is called as a flow diagram. Okay, because that will actually help you understand something which is like what exactly the flow of the you can say data or what we call it as a flow of the application should be. So you can very well go and do such things here itself. So I will just put it over here, as in you will put up use case diagram, you will also put up some flow diagram over here. Now obviously flow diagram can be to a detailed level. So just like you and me may have, rather you may have drawn, you may have put up some sort of, you can say, algorithms. Just like you can say somewhere maybe if you put up and if you jot down something which is called as some work in what we call it as baby steps. Something like, let's say, if I want to add two numbers or calculator, what I would do is I would simply go and collect the data from a user. I will check if it's integer or not. I will just check which particular button is pressed by the user. If it is a plus, I will do the summation. I will display the data and so on. So just like we can have here, I mean, if it is only a number, if it is a minus number, if it is invalid number, those checks can be performed and so on. So just like you have a algorithm or just like you have a flow, a chart kind of, you can say, drawn exactly in the same manner, we would go with something which is called as flow diagram over here, so that the data flow and users action flow you can say can be made clear. And then obviously along with use case, one can very well have the flow clearance as well, taken from the end customer that way. So once this is done, once we have this things done in a legal language also, what you can also do is something which is called as in a similar kind of, you can say, phase, or I mean these things you can say to some extent changes, which means though I said something like use case diagram and flow diagram can be part of this, along with that one can also have, you can say, design itself from the UI perspective. One can have from the design perspective itself, you can say phases put up, which means normally in UI design, what you may have heard that what people do is people actually put up some design on a paper. People actually want to put up some wireframes in some PDF files also. But in case of design itself, you'll find out they can be separate things. For example, in here in the design, I'll just put it in here in the design. Now I'm just going to go and put it in, you can say, not exactly in an even manner. So I have a less space over here. That's the reason what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go and write down in an odd even manner. So inside the design, we can actually go for something which can be architectural design. Okay, so they can be architectural design. I'll just put it in different color again. Let me put it here. Okay, they can be architectural design and they can be user design, or you can say user interface design or design, maybe UX is what I would say. Now normally in case of UX over here, we actually have got two separate parts out here. I would say something which is called as a usability study comes in picture over here. So usability study or usability, I should say UX design or usability design. Maybe who comes in picture is usability expert. So I should say UX design. Okay. And there can be something which can be, let's say, UI design, which can comes in picture. In UI itself, there can be separate parts that I can have over here, which can be something which is, I would say, a simple mock-up design or simple paper design that we can have over here. So normally to that design, I would simply say mock-up design over here, maybe UI mockups, which further can be converted into something which can be called as wireframes. And then finally, what we can go with is something which is called as visual design. Okay, out here. So inside the typical design phase itself, we can actually have, you can say, two different teams working at the same time. So one can very well go with something called as architectural design, which means technical design mostly. And then one can very well go with something called as UX design out here. Now, when it comes to architectural design, somebody who is a technical architect ultimately can be responsible for getting it done. So somebody who is a technical architect can do this typical design thing, and somebody who is like, usability experts and a UI designers team can take a call on these particular parts that we have out here. Okay. Now, few things to understand over here. One of the, you can say, first part in this section itself, that is your mockup UI over here. So specifically, I did say in my last session itself, something like this. These UI mockups that we are talking about, these UI mockups can be actually taken into this earlier phase itself. Okay, typically, like while we do the analysis itself. Okay, and then that itself can be part of or can be added out here itself. So while you do the analysis, what can happen over here? Maybe a team of, you can say, maybe a couple of designers can very well go, or you can say, who are kind of, you can say, maybe UI-wise stakeholders of the application. You'll find out those people can actually come up, and those can actually have some rough mockups put up. Now, those mockups can be put up on a screen, just like you can say, you take a pen paper and you just draw something. It's not as per the measurement, just like you draw a rough design, maybe on any paper. Just like that, you can have that paper based design shared with the people, so that you can tell people like, this is how the, you can say, while you tell them the flow, while you convey the flow, exactly at the same time you can just convey how exactly visually it will look like. Okay, and then you can just keep on maybe telling them that this is what that you can give roughly some examples of, or analogy examples, which can be similar applications that people may have seen. If it's a complete new application type that you're designing or developing, in such cases what you can do is you can actually go and maybe make them visualize what exactly the application would look like, and then accordingly what you can do is you can get more and more inputs from the people. So or approval rate is on higher side if at all you have some UI mockups created. Now those UI mockups, as I said, are not as per the precision. Okay, those are rough designs that you can draw on paper, or you can just put it in MS Paint, or you can just put it anywhere. Okay, so as I said last time as well, let me open whiteboard for you. Just a minute. Give me a minute out here. Let me open whiteboard for all of you. Give me a minute. Yeah, let me start sharing my screen with you. New share, and there we are. So this is, I can say, Microsoft Whiteboard. Okay. So in that abstract application that we have, what you typically can do is, just like we have got, let's say, some designs to be shared. So while you're discussing the flow with, you can say, end people or so, you can also have some sort of, you can say, rough flow, you can say, put up on a screen, just like that. So as I said, on the left hand side, if you can see, somewhere on a paper, I can just put up maybe flow like this. that there is something which is called as, username and password to be entered. There is this star which is without a precision. Sign in, forgot password, new user register here. These buttons will be there. And then normally when it goes on something like, you can say, a mobile screen generally. Okay. So how exactly does it look like on a mobile screen? So maybe you can always have some sort of, you can say, mobile screen, a kind of, you can say, outline, and you can very well put up some rough content over there. They can be button, they can be link one, link two, like one for forgotten, one for register user, that way. So normally you can actually tell them something like this is how it will look like. But as you can see here, it's not as per the precision. Okay. This is nowhere near to our so-called, you can say, wireframes or visual designs. But then this way we can make the flow clear. Okay. Once this flow is clear to the end customers and users, then what we do is this here. So once that UI mockup is clear, we typically go with something which is called as, so-called, you can say, wireframes. Okay. In terms of UI. Now, when it comes to wireframes, these are some things that you actually, as per precision, literally, it's a black and white version of what user is going to go and see. So suppose if it's a login screen, I would always put up login screen more like this. Something like you can just convey user, okay, this is what we have finalized. This is where your logo will be. So don't put any logo. Actually, you don't put any logo. You can just say over here, there can be something which can be a logo over here. Let's say L. Suppose just tell user there is going to be some logo over here. Okay. Tell user that there is going to be something which is called as, let's say, a username and password box over here. So we will have username and we will have, let's say, a password over here to be asked. Tell user that this is exactly, will be the size of, you can say, username box and the password box that we will have. Also tell user that we plan to have, maybe some errors to be shown in some XYZ area. And then plan to tell something like, you can say, maybe a sign in button can be there out here. Sign in, or whether we want like to call it as login, you can say, up to you, because there can be versions that you will hear from people who are going to use this application during the interviews, that sign in looks better than login over here. So I would say simply sign in out here. Okay. So in general, when you see this is, if I say it's a what we call it as a mock-up, again, if it's a mock-up, then there is something wrong, terribly wrong over here. I should have put this in a typical black and white over here. This is how normally UI designers would do it. Okay. So let's say this entire UI design without colors, without what we call as color combinations, but with precisions and simple blocks is something that you draw. Okay. Similar way, you can just have these mock screens designed, developed, and you can very well go for, you can say simply, maybe moving from A page to B page, which means these pages are not interactive. These files are not interactive. Maybe these files are non-interactive. These files can be something like, you can say, maybe somewhere JPG files or something like PDF files. Okay. And these things is what you share with your customer and client. You take a approval with this so-called, I would say, wireframes. Once you take a approval, then you finally go with something which is called as visual design. Now, this phase is larger phase. Okay. The design phase. When you go with visual design, what you do is you actually put some colors into it. Okay. So when you say something like, we have gone through something called as UI mockups, you saw the UI mockup just now. Then comes up something which is called as your so-called this part, something which is called as your design part. Okay. Let me do one thing. Let me take all of this that you see out here, out here. Okay. This is where I'll take it. This is where I'll take it. This UI part. Okay. Doesn't look better out there because I also will have to drop and put up number of things on my screen. Okay. I'll just put it here, JPG or PDF, readable content. I just have the what we call it as logo out here. I just put here username and password. I just put up here this content. Even this content I'll put up over here. And then finally I will just have sign in here and I'll have this button over here. Okay. So you just ultimately draw a flow. Okay. In terms of UI. Just a minute. Okay. So I just have logo here. I'll just put up logo content on a screen. Okay. If I say this is simple wireframe, okay, let's say if it's a wireframe that we have. that we have. After this, what you do, as I said, is you actually put colors. Okay, so put colors and it becomes something which is called as colors with a precision. Okay, so put colors and it becomes visual design. That's what typically we do out here. Okay, now these color combinations can be from observations in the what we call it as, you can say, analysis phase. So here what you do is you can actually go with couple of combinations to the end customer and get one of the design finalized over here. So you can put the colors and then later on those colors like visual designs will be converted. Finally, those designs can be converted into the actual UI language, which means now you will find out a UI specific UI code, I should say, specific to the language picked up. Now, obviously, that language, development language picked up when I say, yeah, a development language, obviously this decision is left to the architectural design. Okay, which means somebody who is going to act as an architect will decide over here what should be the front end technology and what should be the back end technology over here. We haven't gone to that level yet. Okay, so right now, from the UI perspective, we are done. But then when I say UI code specific to the development language picked up by an architect, I should say, by, you can say, maybe architect over here, you will find out what typically happens over here, architect or based on technical specification by technical people. Yeah. So normally what happens in such cases is something like, I deliberately mentioned over here picked up language because I just wanted you to convey rather to convey you is something like this. They can be HTML that you may want. They can be something like, you can say, maybe XAML that you want. They can be something else you may want. So ultimately, these are different. I mean, based on the technology that you picked up, you can actually plan to design and generate or create something called as, you can see, your markup or your UI, what we call it as finalization. Because only giving JPG and PDF will definitely not help the final developers, right? So developers would want something which can be used, you can say, into the actual real development. So ultimately, generation of such kind of designs can be done by developers, rather by designers, into something which is called as HTML, XAML, or for that matter, any language which is picked up by technical architect over here. And this is exactly where so-called, you can say, the UX part gets over. Now there's something I mentioned here, UX design and UI. Normally, when it comes to UX design or UX usability, ultimately usability experts are, you can say, you can say people who ultimately identify how soothing the application can be made as. Okay, it's not only about color combinations, it's also about users experience. That how will be the experience, if at all, I mean, your experience with Swiggy will be different and your experience with Zomato will be different. Okay, and then obviously each one of us can have our own opinion about it, that some of us will like Swiggy more, some of us will like, maybe let's say, Zomato more in that case. So obviously it can be our own perspectives. Something like, you can say, I like the design more. Maybe I like, you can say, less number of clicks are there in case of Zomato. Maybe less number of clicks are there in Swiggy. So ultimately it's as per choice. And then keeping those people in mind, like, some people prefer to have a less clicks. Within less clicks, I should be done. I should just check out of the application. Okay, maybe some people will prefer, okay, the application should be so friendly that they can be maximum number of clicks, we are okay with it, but then it should be like, it should be asking each and every detail to the customer. So that way, which targeted customers are there, and then to whom you have targeted while you design this application, you'll find out all of it ultimately comes up, and that is something which is, uh, it can be like, targeting to the, rather, the design can be as per the customer's expectation if you have done the usability study, and that is something which is done by usability experts who come before your UX designers. Okay, so UI designer is different and UI usability, what we call as experts, are different. In this case, usability experts come before the UI designers normally. Again, obviously, for smaller companies, it may not be applicable because the charges that people, this charge, is like on a very higher side. So normally in small applications also, you may not have that liberty of, you can say, inviting what we call as usability experts. Now, when it comes to something called as architectural design, when it comes to now, that's exactly where technical discussion begins. Okay, so architectural design, when we consider the architect guy, will have to consider a lot many facts over here. What resources does the team have already? What technologies we are going to go and use on front end and back end? Why are we going to go and use those technologies? Some justification must be there. Okay, and at the same time, when it comes to something which is called as architectural design, you also have to think about, you can say, the initial what we call as proto specifically for the technical design itself, which means if it's an object oriented language that the designer picked up, the architect picked up, in that case we will have to also come up with some classes in that case which will be acting as more like a base specifically which can be used in a later on kind of, you can say, applications also. Okay, not clear more difference between the mock UI and a wireframe. So Present Smita, it's like this. Mock UI, when I say, it's not as per the precision. Okay, which means what we call it as it's not exact up to the pixels and so on. This is something which I explained on a whiteboard some time back. I'll just go and share one more time this whiteboard with you. Have a look. What you see on the left hand side, this is not as per the procedure. It's like, some novice user has put up some sort of, you can say, maybe drawing. Is it literally not as per the procedure? Look at the sign in button that is put up over here. This sign in is not as per procedure. This is not, doesn't look even a button. Okay, but this will just make a first impression clear, like, okay, there must be some username and password and some sort of, you can say, text boxes that we have got. Okay, let's call this as what we got as mock UI. Okay, now when it comes to something which is called as you can say the diagram above that you see, there's a logo L, there's a username and password, and there is sign in. Okay, just a block. Actually, logo is not there. It's just a block logo, which means just a block. And something mentioned like, word may be called as logo inside it. I mentioned L here, but it can be something like, let's say, logo as a word you can put up. So let's say, let me put up here logo as a word. This is just to put up and convey, like, these are the boxes, empty boxes, and this is where the content will fit in. This is what you tell to the end customer. Okay, now this is something which can be called as, let's say, a wireframe. Okay, once its wireframe is designed, you actually fill in the colors inside it. Okay, you make it as per the precision, you fill color inside it based on the I can say the interviews that you conducted earlier, based on the color combinations which are like suggested by the end customer. Okay, and then that can be something which can be called as visual design. And finally, visual designs are converted into, you can say, the language that you are, or you can say some sort of, you can say, supporting language that you're going to go on using UI programming or front end programming. In our case, in case of what I would say, the abstract application, you will find in abstract application will be using, let's say, React for development. But then React for front end for a website, ultimately I would be using something which is called as typical HTML for at least UI. Manipulation can be done using React. But then when it comes to HTML, so instead of writing HTML, can we generate the HTML? So that HTML can be generated by certain tools like something called as, let's say, Dreamweaver, for example. So designers are expert in tools, something like, you can say, maybe Photoshop. They can be expert in something which can be Corel Draw. They can be expert in Dreamweaver. They can be expert in expression design, and they can very well go and generate such kind of, you can say, HTML or XAML like markup. You can say based on the need. Okay, so there's a very thin difference that you'll find out, but typically designing designers go through, you can say, maybe phases like that. Did you get that now? I hope you did understand that. Yeah, okay, fine, thanks. Okay, so after we are done with this basic what we call as design part, now this particular portion, which means we are only done with discussion of this as of now. Okay, this much is something that we have discussed as of now. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about something like, you can say, having something which can be called as, let's say, a UI designing run. Okay, in picture. This is something that we have discussed only. Yeah, but then that is something which can be like, creating a mock-up and creating a final wireframe that can be, you can say, managed. Once you have, you can say, confirmation from the end customer, like, yes, this is the flow, these are mock-ups are exactly create, you can actually make them as per the procedure. So it can be done in no time, literally, by the designers. Once they have, kind of unformatted kind of a design ready, what they can do is they can very well go for, maybe putting some precision into it. That way they can very well do that. Now comes up a discussion, something about, you can say, maybe architectural design when it comes to. So what exactly do we do in architectural design? That's what we are going to go and discuss now. Okay. So let's take this, you can say, discussion on to, you can say, another whiteboard now. Okay, this is what we want to discuss right now. This is under the discussion right now. That's what we wanted to understand now. Okay, architectural design, coding, unit testing, testing, deployment, and so on. These are, you can say, later phases. Okay, so that is something which we are not going to go and target right now. So we are in session 2 right now, and these things can come up later on. Okay, so as of now, we are just into something which is called as architectural design. So let's save this and let's wipe this particular so-called, you can just screen now. So now that we are clear with so-called, you can say, requirements, we have done, let's say, use cases or so. Now, when it comes to architectural design, what are the things that we consider or any architect would consider over here? So there's a guy, this guy called architect. There's a person called architect, other, instead of calling it as a guy. Let's say it's some person who is architect. What are the tools that we use to design? So tools we use for UI design or technical design, Pooja? Okay, so tools we use specifically for UI design are, you can say, something like this. Specifically for what we call as image creations also, designers can prefer using something which can be called as Corel Draw. Okay, people can use something like images. For that, they can use Photoshop. Okay, they can be something for HTML generation. I just said for initial design, they can just use these tools. Okay, and finally, when it comes to HTML generation, uh, when the mockup or your visual design needs to be converted into the final what we call as HTML, they would use some tool like Dreamweaver. Okay, now there's based on the, you can say, technology being used, you may use something which can be called as expression web. This is another tool that we have from Microsoft. This is another one, something like based on the technology again. I mean, if you're planning to not use HTML, but planning to go for something like, let's say, Xamarin applications, for example, for those applications, you can go with something which is called as expression design as in tool that we have. So these are certain tools that these people use. Okay, Corel Draw, Photoshop, Dreamweaver, Expression Web, and Expression Design that way. So this can be, used. And for initial simple what I would say, mockups also, for easily creating mockups, people can use whiteboards, people can use plain paper, people can also use something which can be called as, you can say, mind map. Okay, like tools. I mean, many free tools are there to basically, quickly draw the mockup UI, but then these are the tools which are actually as per the precision. Okay, so these are some tools that designers can use in that case, but that's not something which is, developers expertise are, so we can just leave it to designers. Now, when it comes to something which is called as technical architecture over here, so let's say technical design, I'll put it as, let me come back to, okay, that's fine. Now, when it comes to something which is called as technical design over here, so in terms of technical design, there are several facts which comes in picture. Something like we have to ultimately, pick up something which can be called as technology over here. And this technical guy, along with obviously those who are stakeholders, and I can say a role to play, who are like, business stakeholders. So ultimately, we will have to take a decision, the resources that the team already has over here. So maybe while you technically design, there are certain things that we have to keep it in mind over here. Okay, so something like, you can say, current trends over here in market. Something like what exactly is a technology for such kind of applications that, market is using. Something like, you can say, maybe competitors, or you can say rivals, you can say application. Okay, maybe a rival app, I would say, technology or technology stack being used over here. So you can say others who are in the market with the similar kind of application, what is the technology stack, being used out there? We need to answer, we need to understand all these facts. Okay. The resources that we have right now, which means the developers that we right now have over here, the resources we have. Okay. There's something which can be so-called, you can say, resources we have, how many resources we have. Okay. Then a time constraint that we have over here, time or budget constraint that we can have over here. Budget constraints can be there. Something like we need to understand, is there anything which is, so-called, you can say, a timeline something like within 15 days only we will have to complete the application, within 20 days we have to complete the application, or we have 1 year or 2 years or whatever. Okay. Budget constraint, something like suppose if we have to deliver in less amount of time, then we have to extend the budget, because then we'll have to find out some sort of ready to work kind of a resources in market, and then ultimately we need to hire them and deploy them. Okay. If that budget is little less, then we have to ultimately ask for more time. The reason behind that, then resources that we have already which are like free, if we have to use those resources, and if those are not expert in the technology that we have decided, then we may need to cross train them. We may need to train them. They may need to go through some learning curve, and which can be, you can say, plus minus, you can say, can vary for each of the resource that way. Obviously it has, you can say, constraints. Something like, you can say, budget and time, these are the two important factors which will play a very vital role in this aspect. Then let's say you pick up a technology, like as I said, current trends in a market. Okay. Then you decide over here the technology that you are going to go and work with over here, beside the technology stack out here. Okay. After you decide the technology stack, and then what you do is you ultimately, I mean, it's not something like, in one day you will decide it. You will generally have, so called, you can say, maybe so called, you can say, building blocks ultimately. So you will actually put up something what is building blocks of the application on a screen. All the requirement analysis are documented into any document and get signed off before the development starts. Some technology says business blueprint. Yes, that again, as I said, normally there's a sign off which is required before you proceed. Because if you're understanding after the analysis, you see, why do you do analysis is because we need to understand in technical terms we are correct based on our, I mean, in technical terms we understand the requirement. That's what, we need to confirm, and that's the reason we do analysis. Once we have this analysis done, we can actually have what we call as design documents, or so called, you can say, business blueprints, shared with the customer. We can take a sign off from that, that yes, we are ready with this, understanding. And then if we fail to understand something, we can get it clarified immediately. Once we understand it, then we can go with another sign off, which can be something which can be technical design or UI design. Okay. UI design, normally sign off actually happens because it's, visual is there in front of you. Normally technical design is something which, a technical architect himself will have to certify, like, "Okay, these are the reasons that we picked up this technology, these resources we have, this is the timeline and budget we have got, and this is the detailed plan for the application development we have got." So obviously it won't happen in a, so what we call as a half day or one day, that, we will actually go and share this, what we call as sprints with the end customer. But yes, I would say that we have to take a sign off. Otherwise what will happen is it really becomes difficult, because you have to involve your customer and end customer or clients in what we call it as, in this process. Otherwise it becomes very difficult. What if our understanding is wrong? What if our analysis is wrong? And what if, you can say, based on wrong understanding we start building everything else? Okay. So yes, we have to take a sign off, and then ultimately it's a simple business blueprint, or something which we can say a typical requirement analysis document is what we can do. Okay. A simple analysis that we have made, and we can just convey. Normally when you share something which is called as a mock-up design, or when you share something which is called as wireframes, at that time itself what you can do is you can very well share, you can say, your technical understanding of the, you can say, details. Normally use case diagram is something which is the best one, just to understand the flow. So flow diagram, use case diagram is something which is, easy to get a sign off, because that itself will consider something like whether our understanding is correct and whether we have done the correct analysis, which means this user will do these kind of actions, whether we are correct on that. Once we are correct, then in a flow diagram it will be more clear, like, what are the detailed action steps that, user will take. So ultimately use case and flow, that itself will make it clear. So after like, requirement analysis, ultimately use case and flow diagram, these are like, typical sufficient things, but it has to be in a detailed manner, complete detailed manner. Okay. Okay. So now what I'll do is, in here, in the current, like, once we understand time, budget constraint, once we understand the technical stack that we have got out here, uh, then obviously, like, just before you decide the technical stack over here, we also will have to understand something like, you can say, typical building blocks, which means how exactly data will flow and so on. Okay. So we have got a technical stack, we will design, and then what we'll do is we will have like how exactly communication will happen between these technologies that we have used, because using like one single technology or one single framework may not be sufficient in today's world, because we need to target mobile screens, we need to target desktop based browsers, we need to target, let's say, maybe some special devices. So obviously we have certain concerns. Yes, Ravindra, just put it inside what we call as the, like in the Q&A window. Okay. So current trends in the market. So for our Upstack application, I'll just continue. So current trends in market over here. So current trend in market, you'll find out normally there is something like you can say people who would use something like you can say maybe applications over a mobile are more, okay, that are using applications specifically on something which is called as maybe let's say I would say over the web or over the browser. So ultimately people prefer today that if at all their application can have a presence over the web, and if their application has a presence over the or can target to multiple number of media devices. Okay, so in such cases the current trend in a market is more like this, that is target to something which is called as devices like your desktop based machines, desktop, laptop, okay, ultimately browsers, so that people can get to know. Then there can be something which can be, let's say, apps. Okay, when it comes to app, normally you will find out majority of the share of the market goes to Android. Then it goes to something which is called as, let's say, maybe iOS or Apple. I would say iOS. And then there can be another thing which can be like star, everything else that comes and falls in. Okay, they can be obviously tablets and mobiles that can actually come up in picture. So obviously when people start doing some sort of, you can say, development for a browser, what comes in picture is ultimately situation like this, that I would actually go and pick up maybe something like some web application type kind of, you can say, technology. So maybe a web app technology I would say pick up over here. Okay, some web app technology I'll pick up here. And then obviously in web app itself, web application development technology, web app development technology, I would say. So obviously we would go and pick up here variety of different things are there. Should I share visual design with my client first and get it sign off and then go for its architectural design? But in this way, if client rejects my architectural design later, my visual design is just useless. Absolutely yes. So it's not something that you share visual design directly. You actually you share something which is called as mockup first, because mockup actually takes less amount of time to design because it's not as per the precision. Okay, so you don't share visual design directly with the customer. What you do is you ultimately, obviously initial thing that is client comes up with is whether he or she is in need of a web app or a mobile app or both of them. Okay, that how exactly are the targeted devices that we have got. So this comes up from the interviews itself, like we are creating a mobile app, we are creating a website, or we are creating both of them. Okay, so once it is clear, designing mockup is just, you can say, a few days job. Once you design the mockup, I'm not saying visual design. Visual design is the last stage. So once you design the mockup, get the mockups and what we call it as a use case and your flow diagram, or ultimately flow, data flow. So get the data flow, get use case, and get something which is called as mockup certified, or you can just signed off from the customer. Once that is clear that yes, this is correct, then you go with something called as I would say wireframes. So put up wireframes and get wireframes certified, or so called, you can say, signed off from the customer. And then finally you go with visual design, because in visual design you may have to share certain combinations. So based on the need, customer may want to see a first look of, you can say, the design. So it can be something like, you can say, color combinations. So people may have a different opinion. So general trend in market says that we go with something which is like couple of designs, which means couple of color combinations we actually share, which means combination A and combination B. And that also is put up in the what we called as your agreement with the customer initially. Something like we will be sharing, so what you can say, couple of designs with you based on your understanding and based on our requirement analysis. And then like after the interviews, you may have got to know something like, you can say, user is targeting, let's say, more of, you can say, design. Maybe people may have some designs in mind. Okay, so people can have something like, okay, it should look like Swiggy, it should look like something like you got so and so application. People may have in mind something called as, this is the color combination I would really expect over here. So try to understand who are the, you can say, current market movers in that area. Find out what their applications do. Find out, and obviously this comes up in an initial interview process itself. Okay, that you can actually keep on, guiding, and that you keep on, you can say, understanding their requirement by showing them some sort of, you can say, existing applications itself, so that you can actually, finish it more, what we call it as easily. So that sometimes what user has to say you may not understand. So sometimes by showing some sort of, you can say, rival app or some competitor's app will simply help. Something like, you can say, this particular application, do you mean something like this? Okay, take the design combinations, and then ultimately your color combinations, and then based on your contract you share two or three different varieties of visual design with the end customer. But not initially. First get the mockup clear, then get the wireframes cleared, and then you go with visual design. Because if the customer keeps on saying this color combination doesn't suit well, this is the color I would want over here, so the appropriate kind of, against changes the design team will have to do accordingly. Okay. So you don't get the visual design, you can certify it immediately. Yeah, so you do it later on. So now coming back to our discussion, so it's like desktop based browsers, and rather you pick up, let's say you decided that we will go with web development technology. Okay, then what technologies do we have in market? So specifically for web development, people do use something like, let's say, Java, people do use .NET, people do use something which can be, let's say, PHP, and so on. Okay, then obviously here for Android applications and rather mobile applications, what people do based on the market share. So let's say if I'm targeting Android devices only, I would always go and pick up something like, okay, let's do one thing. Let's have here something like this. For Android applications, I would use something which can be, let's say, maybe Java plus Android Studio. Okay, so Java, yeah, maybe Java itself I would use over here. Specifically for iOS, for the latest, you can say, applications, I would target something which is called as Objective-C, and so on, Objective-C or Swift. So Objective-C or something which can be Swift over here. But then, do I have a the technology resources, for all of this over here? I may not. Okay. So take an example here. When you pick up maybe something like this, like what tech? I mean, technology stack related challenges are too many. When you decide, let's say, to go with Java over here, in a case in Java itself, there are several ways. Something like how much amount of code are you really planning to do in Java? So they can be something like you can decide to go with something which is going to be typical JSP. You can decide to go with Spring. You can decide to go with Spring Boot. Okay. You can decide to go with something called as struts over here. There are a variety of, you can say, frameworks that we have in Java. When you decide to go with, let's say, .NET, for example, you may plan to go with like plain .NET may not help. So maybe I need to go with something like, let's say, maybe ASP.NET. Maybe I need to go with ASP.NET MVC. Okay. Maybe I need to go with something which can be called as ASP.NET, maybe MVC core in this case. So I may have to go and maybe pick up maybe technology like this. Suppose if I decide to go with something like PHP over here, then I may have to go and pick up certain frameworks over here, something which can be, let's say, maybe Laravel that I need to go with. There can be something like I may want to go with something which can be Codeigniter, let's say. Okay, Codeigniter. Maybe I would like to decide over here that I will go with something called as Zend. Maybe I will go with something which can be typical PHP script itself, plain PHP over here. But then these things do vary. Okay, so obviously this decision is not that simple, because who are you targeting to, let's say, mobile as well as maybe some users browsers as well. That way I only talked about two different varieties like Android and something like, let's say, iOS over here. There can be other varieties as well that I may want to target, and accordingly so many languages and so many frameworks will come in picture over here. Now question comes up over here is which one I should pick up over here. Okay, so in this case, normally, specifically for our abstract application, when it comes to, so abstract application, what we pick up over here is something like, let's say, on server side, we would pick up something which is called as, let's say, Java out here. Now, when it comes to Java over here, Java is open source. That's the first thing. We get easily the resources if it all we fall short of the resources. Okay, too many resources are there in the market, so we can actually get Java resources easily than other resources that we have got. Specifically when it comes to Laravel, Codeigniter, Zend, PHP resources are that way, you can say, less in market compared to Java resources. Okay. Second, normally people can be easily cross-trained to Java if at all they want to, they, they're the, you can say, they're just startup in, you can say, Java itself. So you'll find out learning Java will be super easy if at all you already know C++. License wise, you will say Java is ultimately, some open source. So obviously we can very well use it. Next, you'll find out resources are available at a cheap cost. Okay, because there are too many of them that we can get. And then obviously, specifically, when it comes to something which is called as, for your applications maintenance that we have got, we will be using, like instead of using plain JSP, which will be difficult for when it comes to maintenance. So for easily maintaining your application, we'll actually go and pick up over here Spring. Okay. So ultimately Java Spring kind of, I can say, application is something that we would be targeting out here. So let's say specifically on server side, we would go with something which is called as Java and Spring Boot. Okay. That obviously that decision can be taken, you can say, afterwards, like whether to go with Spring or whether to go with Spring Boot over here. Okay, now basic difference we will convey, but as of now, just hold on. So we have got Java and maybe let's say Spring in general on server side. Now, obviously, if at all I have to justify this to my end customer, like why exactly do you pick here Java also? So I would simply say, okay, I picked up Java. The typical trend I'll tell you first. Okay, let me save this content first and let me clear this so that we can just, take it to the next level. Let me clear. And unfortunately, I can't see anything over here as clear. Okay, I can see that. There we go. A typical Upstack application, you will find out when it comes to, we have got something like this. We have got, let's say, a database here. Okay, so database picked up out here is typically, so what you can say, MySQL that we can pick up. Okay, so maybe a database out here. I would pick up database like MySQL. They can be something like, you can say, for front end or for databases or for communication, I would say here Java and something which can be Spring. Okay, Java Spring. There is something which is called as JPA. Okay, something which is called as persistent APIs, I would say. Then there is something which can be called as simple connectors, and then on the client side, I would simply say HTML5. I would say Bootstrap. I would say something which is called as the React JS is something that we can target. Okay, now here, if we just, put it in this manner, something like, we have got, let's say, this technology stack picked up. Why did we pick this up? So obvious thing is Upstack application related data is something we need to fit in somewhere. Okay, so we will have out here some sort of, we can say, database first of all. So we are going to go and pick up here, let's say, database like this. Okay, it's going to be simple relational database that we have got out here. So obvious thing is when it comes to something like, you can say, database like this over here, there can be counter questions that you may have from some technical people at the client end. Normally today, you can say clients do have at their own end some technical person, because people don't want to get bullied. Okay, so people don't want to just say yes to whatever you are saying or your technical architect says. So obviously to validate the things, you can say at a second level, what normally technical, like clients do nowadays is they actually have some technical person who will monitor the overall process. Okay, so when you pick up maybe database like MySQL, you'll have to give a justification over here. So why did you pick up here MySQL? So current trend in the market is something like something which is called as, let's say, MongoDB over here. Okay, MongoDB. Current trend is something which is called as Cosmos. Current trend is something which can be Document DB over here. So why the hell you did not use any of it? Why did not use Oracle for that matter? In this case, why did not use SQL Server for that matter? So why did you pick up something which is called as MySQL? Obviously, counter questions can be there. So your architect should be able to justify those over here. So we did not pick up MongoDB or something called as Cosmos, or yes, Matthew, just ask. So why didn't you not pick up maybe these kind of, you can say, content? So I did not pick up, let's say, something which is called as, let's say, Mongo. I did not pick up Cosmos, or I did not pick up Document, because my data is not something which is called as, Twitter feeds. My data is not something which is called as Facebook to what we call as feeds, or something which is called as tweets or some WhatsApp messages. So it's not in a file format. Okay, my data is a simple data which I will be capturing from the UI. Okay, it's just a plain character content that I will have. I just need to store it. So I will have data stored regarding the user's profile and what users do. Some associations will be there. Some linking will be there between the data that user fills in screen 1 and screen 2. That way out here. What if the architect does not have a technical background to decide what technical stack needs to be used? Okay, normally technical architect, again, when it comes to, you will find out that a technical architect, when he or she decides like what technologies to be used, you know, these are the core technical people who have been in that industry, since, let's say, maybe, these are the people with experience. So they have gone through all what we call it as technical, what we call it as, experience only, which means they have been in and out with the technology, you can say, since, you can say, many you can say years of experience they carry. So it's like, architect has to have understanding, or needs to have understanding of technical thing. At the same time, the architect will have to have understanding of something which is like, the costing for the technology. Architect will have to understand something like, you can say, who can be groomed to what kind of a technology, and then what kind of a technology stack is currently available in the market or currently goes well in the market. Like, these are the people who basically are up to date, you can say, as per the technical needs of the, you can say, market and the customers and clients as well. So normally these are also the people who are good in terms of, you can say, designing your application when it comes to something which is called as object oriented designs and so on. Okay, obviously it can happen something like the technical architect who is going to go and design the application, he's just going to go and give you overall blocks. But maybe whether to go with native application for Android and whether to go for something called as hybrid application for Android, obviously those decisions can be taken, which means every architect may not be, you can say, expert in every other technology, but then overall lookout is some, that every architect will be able to do that way. So architect may not be expert in something called as, let's say, some database like, let's say, SQL Server. Architect may not be expert in some technology like, let's say, Xamarin, for example. But then overall, you can say they have understanding about, you can say, why some X technology is getting used and where exactly we can use it. Because they had, like, I mean, they would have got some chances, something like, you can say, either become something called as domain expert, or you become something which is called as technical architect by simply understanding the technology. You'll find out everybody has those chances. You can move into management, you can move into technology, or you can move into something which can be domain expert also. So these are the people who picked up maybe the what we call as technical aspect of their career. So I mean, instead of going into management or so, so you always find out, like, these are the people who have to keep themselves always, on the edge of technology. They'll always have to be updated. So it, I mean, I haven't seen, at least, the people who are architect and they don't have a technical background over here. Yeah, it can happen that, the technology that that they are going to go and use. I mean, they obviously will suggest the technology to be used when it comes to, they suggest, I'm saying they suggest what technology to be used over here. And there can be evaluations which can be by a technical panel. Like, you can say, there can be something which can be called as POCs, proof of concepts developed, and based on the POCs, you can actually go and pick up frameworks, or you can say tools. So it's not something that you actually go and, start developing on the day one after architecture is ready. You also do some POCs, which means if I decide something like, let's say, going for React in this case, so why to use React? Why not Angular in this case? Why to use React with Redux? Why not use it with Flux? Obviously, these are some things which you can always understand once you understand and deep dive into that technology. Just because market needs React and I will use React, that won't happen. I will use React, but React with Redux or React with Flux, that always comes from experience. So some expert in React, expert in the technology must be there. And if we don't have one, then we have to do some sort of POCs. So before we actually go for development, a proof of concept needs to be developed. Okay, something which can be a pilot of your application, which will simply have one functionality and will just, you can say, one flow is something that we will complete. Once we understand, yes, it is doable, we will actually go and trust more on the technology and dig in more on the technology. So it is something which is more of an iterative manner that we go with. So coming back to the, you can say, thing over here is something like, let's say, if I have to justify why did I use here MySQL. First of all, my data is not in file format. My data is not something which is called as tweets or feeds and so on. My data is not something which is called as NoSQL data. My data is a SQL data, a structured data is what I would have. Okay, I will have something which is called a relation so-called you can say data. So if I can put it in Excel, and if I can very well map it, like this is users details and so on, I can justify this is completely relational data. That with respect to this user, I have got this table, this data, this data, this data, this sheet, that sheet, and so on. And what you can do is, instead of maybe calling it as a sheet, now what you can do is you can very well call it as tables. So that's the reason I picked up here relational database. Okay, then why did not you pick up Oracle or MySQL, Oracle or SQL Server? Because of licensing cost. Oracle is more costly, SQL Server is even more costly, and instead of that, we picked up something which is called as MySQL, which is ultimately a tiny version of Oracle itself, or you can say better version of Oracle itself, I would say. And then it's something which is cost-wise, you can specifically, you can say cost-wise, it's literally negligible. Okay, it actually can be offered by the host, what we call as servers, you can say more or less number of times free. Normally cloud providers, or so-called you can say cloud hosting providers, can offer you MySQL, you can say at a very cheap cost compared to you can say Oracle and SQL Server. Maybe that's the reason I picked up something called as, let's say, MySQL instead of Oracle, instead of Cosmos, instead of SQL Server, or for that matter anything else. This is something that architects should be able to justify. Next, I picked up Java Spring. Why? So first of all, Java resources can be easily available. They can be Java resources which can be available already in the team. Something which can be something like people can be easily trained on Java, because people will have experience. Let's say people who have a knowledge, who are just out of academics. People will have knowledge about, you can say, at least those who hire, those who get hired in IT companies. You will find out these people may have a background of C++. They may be knowing something which can be called as, let's say, OOP, okay, object-oriented programming. These people may be something which can be trained easily through inductions into Java, okay. And here for better maintenance purpose, we pick up something which can be Spring, so that you can say code level changes can be done in an isolated manner. So separation of concern is another thing over here. So we picked up something like, let's say, Java Spring over here. Something which comes up over here, something called as JPA. So normally what happens over here is, we would literally, like using Java, we would like to communicate with the database, and we need to do the mapping. Simplest example is like this. I would need a mapping like this here, something of this sort. I can always go and have, let's say, some table. So if there's a table in a database, just like Excel sheet is there in a workbook, you will find that, suppose if there's a users table, okay. So what a user can have, user can have an ID, user can have a name here. Give me a minute. Okay, so if user can have an ID, user can have a name here, user can have something which can be, let's say, age, and so on. Okay, several other fields we can have over here, so on. Start. In this case here, if I'm targeting something like, let's say, the user has a maybe information like this, in case of Java, I can always present that data in this manner. So I would go and put up over here class, which can be something which can be called as user class over here. Okay, a class user can have something which can be called as, let's say, integer ID. Okay, I can also have here string name over here. I can also have integer age, and so on. So ultimately, we can always plan to design something like classes over here. So normally, in case of designing, you will find out there's always one-to-one mapping that we typically do. Okay, and there can be so-called, you can say, some complex mappings as well. So by knowing something like Java is object oriented, typically we as in architects, we plan to do something like this. Okay, so a table in here, okay, generally a table in here, user table in database like MySQL, is typically mapped with user class in case of Java. But this mapping is something which can be done typically manually. So earlier we used to do it manually, but instead of we doing this manually, we have got direct APIs available now. With this, what we can do, using something which can be so-called, you can say, JPA, persistent APIs, Java persistent APIs. What we can do is, we can do this kind of a mapping, you can say, from A to B layer. In a sense, if I design the classes first, I can very well go and define something which can be table. Okay, which means it can be simple, quick click. It can be simple, you can say, simple step I can have, and I can just have table to class mapping or class to table mapping. Either I can generate the classes or I can generate a table itself. You'll find that using JPA, such kind of, you can say, mapping can be done easily. Okay, those who are aware of, you can say, Hibernate, somewhat similar is what we are talking about. So we picked up over here something called as JPA over here. Okay, so ultimately Java is what we picked up because resources are available easily. I have no idea. It's going to be a repeat session at 12 o'clock. So you need not join in that case. So there's something what is you can say class to you can say table kind of you can say mapping that we can have out here. Okay, so we would use that. So why did I use Java? Because resources are available easily. First of all, resource wise it is what we call it as easy solution for me. Then I will be using Java specifically because people can be groomed in a quick manner. And then at the same time, Java goes very well. Hosting is available at a cheap cost. So why can't we just use it? APIs with respect to MySQL are easily available that way. Why did I use Spring here? For maintenance purpose. Maintenance will be super low if I use Spring as a framework with respect to Java. Why did I use JPA? So that I can have this class and table kind of, you can say, mapping thing done so that I can develop faster in Java Spring itself while I communicate with MySQL that way. So I used something which is called as JPA. Okay. And then what? Maybe you will find out now after this particular guy, like, Java will expose some sort of, you can say, maybe endpoints, and we will communicate. We will expose something which is called as JSON data format, which means it's like this. I will be giving call to a server and I will be collecting the data, which means there can be some sort of URL over here. Whatever Java application you have, that Java application you can very well host. Okay, so there can be some host that you can have here, host server over here. There's something which can be, that we can pick up. So by default, you'll find out there's going to be some host server, or I would say hosting server. I would say hosting in general, typically over here. There can be some hosting on web server. Okay, that we would do. And then by default, we will be like, this, it's like, layers. So your Java code will communicate with database. It can pull the data, it can push the data, and all data will be made available in a JSON data format. Obviously, we have a competition over here. Something like, so what you can say, why did not use XML? So obviously XML is bulky. That's the reason I did not use XML. Simple straight answer over here. So we use JSON. Then why did not you use over here something called as ASP.NET or .NET in general as a framework? Why did not you use PHP over here? You know the answer. .NET is something which is called as you can say costly resources. And at the same time, when it comes to hosting also, hosting is actually on a higher cost in .NET compared to Java. Okay, what about PHP? The resources may not be available that easily, specifically for PHP. Though hosting can be cheaper, but then resources may not be available. So that's the reason we picked up maybe something called as Java over here. So these are kind of parallel technologies that we have got over here. So I did not use this because of so and so reason. I should be able to justify that. I did not use XML because it's bulky in nature. So I used here JSON as a data format. Okay, who's going to go and consume that data? So somewhere, normally, if at all I keep on creating a UI or final user interface on the server side, what I would see over here is instead of like, today's trend, you'll find out, instead of like, you creating full UI specifically on you can just server side and then shipping that UI back to the what we call it as browser, you'll find it's costly because of the data transfer size. So instead of that, normally what we prefer is we try to ship more and more logic to the browser side. Why is that? People are like clients specifically. So on the browser side, people have got enough amount of RAM, even enough amount of CPUs, and even the internet speed is bigger and better compared to you can say what was there 10 years before. So in that case, why can't we just offload more and more logic to the you can say browser side itself than server doing that job? So that's the reason this API thing did work very well, which means nowadays in Java.NET PHP, we just keep on accepting only data and we keep on only giving you data. But then based on that data, if we have to really create some UI, that logic is typically given to the browser side. And that logic can be written using plain JavaScript. Okay. Now that JavaScript logic can be written, or we can actually have a Java rather logic written way faster using React or Angular like libraries. Then why use React? Why not use Angular over here? Angular is a bit bulky in size. When it comes to React, it's quick. Okay. Which means certain things, specifically abstract application like applications can be developed very easily in case of React, because that way it's one of the what we call it as easy to learn kind of a library than Angular. Okay, so React is something that we actually go with. I believe that output data format depends on the technology used. Like here, we are using Java. There is a Java object and then called provide JSON data, not XML. How do you agree? No, we can very well shoot JSON as well as XML. So even if we are using, let's say, Java objects, whether it is .NET or you can say so-called, PHP, it really doesn't matter. You can very well, like there are APIs available to convert data into the JSON format and data into XML format. And XML is still in use because in XML we can actually have some schema imposed. In JSON, putting a schema can be a challenging job. So here JSON is used because it's a lightweight in nature. That's the only reason we are using JSON. Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to something called as you can say client side. So HTML5, the current latest version of HTML that we have picked up, Bootstrap, in a sense, we can actually go and make our application, make our website, look better, specifically on mobile screen and tablet screen. So we'll be using HTML5, we'll be using Bootstrap. It's a CSS. Ultimately, some sort of, you can say, helper classes, which are just going to go and help us do some sort of, you can say, maybe, UI changes whenever it comes to, you can say, mobile screen or tablet screen that way. So this is something which is another thing that we go with. And React.js is something which is a library from, I would say, Facebook, and which is just going to go and help us have something like what I would say, it's just going to go and help us do all the logic, specifically with respect to UI generation, data collection, and pass on that data back to the browser side also. So you will find out this communication becomes super easy that way. Hence, we picked up this kind of, we can say, technology stack also is what we can convey that way. Yeah. Why not use Node.js at a server side? Yes, we can use Node.js as well on a server side, but then typical mapping with respect to the data, which we're talking about, like, table to class kind of a mapping can be done with the help of something which can be called as, JPA in an easy manner. That's the reason we are actually going with something which is called as, Java Spring or JPA or Java in general over here. So Node.js specifically when it comes to IO operations, specifically when it comes to, then Node.js is way popular. Okay, because then IO operations can be like, can be time consuming or can be what we call it as, not that good with respect to Java, .NET or PHP. But when it comes to something which is called as IO operations, I would always use Node in that case that way. Yes, Sachin, please put up your question in the chat window or in the, I can say, Q&A window. So hence we picked up this kind of a technology on the browser side. And obviously, I mean, this is not mentioned anywhere in upgrades, what we call it as, the document, which is, the technical stack document. But you will find out that, once you have this two things developed, server side code separately written, client side code, browser side code, separately written, you will find out one of the amazing thing. Okay, client side code. Yeah, technology stack. So I would say a server side technology stack over here. So you can just put a barrier over here and you can simply say, this is how we have partitioned it, client side and server side. Server side is on the right hand side is what I would say over here. So server side, maybe technology stack that I may have picked up over here. So point to understand is you can pick up the technology stack and you can actually go and maybe, make the communication possible that way. Now, after like there's one more plus point. If you pick up maybe technology stack like this, you can very well, have another chance over here. Since you have picked up specifically Bootstrap over here, this will make your application, look better on a mobile as well. And then eventually, if you plan to develop a mobile application later on, you can take the same client-side technology stack with Bootstrap, React, and HTML5, and you can very well compile your application as an Android and iOS application later on. It's that way easy. Okay. So this is how we typically go and pick up a let's say a technology stack. Just to give me a minute. Give me a minute. Okay. So whatsoever we discussed so far, did you understand it? Does it make sense? Because we are in a stage 2 right now. Did we all understand this, guys? Okay. Is this discussion helpful? Okay, great. Okay, very good. So now let's do one thing. This is exactly where we wanted to reach today. Okay. Now, after obviously you pick up a technology stack also, obvious things that we will have to do later on is something like you can say code, because now obviously DB design comes in picture. So what you can say maybe coding with respect to technology comes in picture, and so on. So obviously those things will come up in picture, you can say later on. Then obviously comes up unit testing. Why do we need a unit testing? Just to ensure that our logic written is according to the what we call it as the design, or our logic is actually correct, and then it satisfies the purpose for which we plan to do all this, you can say, coding. Okay, so this is what I really wanted to discuss for the day. Okay, if you have any concerns, questions, queries, feel free to put it up in the so-called, you can say, maybe the Q&A window. Meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll just put up, I forgot to put up here. There is, okay, there's only one poll, I guess. Okay, there is no polling like mid poll. Just a minute. Okay, maybe I'll just do it later on. Yes. So did you like understand it? And then, are we all, good to end the session? I mean, I hope it was fruitful. You did mention that though, in your, I can say, Q&A window, but then if there are any concerns, questions you have, feel free to put it in the Q&A window. And then, if we are good to close, then, then maybe I can just put up a poll in front of you. Yeah. So let me know what you feel about it. There is somebody who raised a hand, I guess. So just feel free to put up the content in the chat window. Yep. Okay, Anukul, thank you. Okay. So meanwhile, let me do one thing just to ensure that, we are on, you can say, we are good to close. I just put a poll in front of you. So I would want you to just, put a poll, and we can continue having the discussion. So it's not the end of the session. We can just continue having a discussion. So should not be a concern. I know it is more like a live session, but I just try to ensure through what we call as these windows, what we call as whiteboard windows. I just try to ensure that we understand all these things. Yeah. Obviously, there will be like you may have to look through the entire session one more time just to understand things are correct, or you understand, or your understanding is correct. So obviously, there are a lot many things that you will have to do with Upstack application as of now. A lot many things are yet to be done. Yeah. Yes, there's something in the chat window. You said about the software, it will be explained in detail. About the software, will it be explained in detail? Softwares to be used? Aditya, I mean, what sort of softwares will be used while coding, or what sort of technical stack will be used in detail? I guess the session is already getting recorded, and it will be like a link will be available with you for the YouTube. I guess coordinator will share the link of the session with you. While coding and technical stuff. Yes. While coding, normally we will be using something like, I would say IntelliJ is one of the, you can say, editor that we will be using specifically for coding. With IntelliJ, Java coding, and so-called, you can say your React coding, there's enough intelligence that you can get. So that is something which all will be done in case of IntelliJ as an editor. Yeah, and there itself you will find out something like unit testing framework with respect to Java, like Java unit testing framework is something which will be used. JUnit is there for that matter. So we'll be using JUnit in that case. So yes, I guess there is some anonymous attendee, but recording of the session is, I guess, coordinator will share it with you. It's getting recorded, so it will be available over YouTube. Will we be building Upstack application from the scratch? Can't we use Eclipse IDE? You can use Eclipse IDE, but then normally for Spring Boot, it is always better to use something which is called as your IntelliJ that way. Like maybe slicing down your application becomes super easy with respect to IntelliJ. Intelligence becomes again like having intelligence becomes another easy thing. But you can very well go with Eclipse as well. JPA works very well with IntelliJ. Will we be developing Upstack from the scratch during the course? So Anukul, it's like this. This course is just to help you understand the typical flow of application design. So as I said, will we be developing Upstack application from the scratch? I would say there will be simple code base which will be given to you after this session. and that code base will be simply to guide you, like which technology fits in where. Okay, so there will be some database, there will be something which can be, let's say, some Java code that we can place, and then ultimately some steps which will be conveyed to you, like how do you run the application also. There will be some fill in the blank as well, wherein you need to just fill in the blank and put up some code, so that what you can say, you can very well go and maybe try to put in some logic whenever required. But then since it's just a flow understanding that we needed to have, abstract application, you'll find out, you will, without being expert in React, without being expert in Java, without being expert in MySQL, you will be like like developing the abstract application by simply doing a fill in the blank kind of a thing. Okay, so that any technology tomorrow, you need to convey, you can just convey, like this technology is used, this is where we used it. This is just to help you understand the flow of the application development. That is the, you can say, purpose of this particular course. So I would say, answer to your question is yes and no. Yes, we'll be developing something from the scratch, but will we be coding? So no, we will be rather placing the code which will be already given to us, and we'll be just going through the flow that way. Okay, so Anukul, I hope you got your answer. What are the good tools for? Oh, okay. So again, I mean, whatever was conveyed to me, it was like so-called, we just have to go through the simple steps. Like, in this initial discussion that we are having about the software development life cycle, we will be discussing about something like, you can say, simple flow, like what was put up in a first whiteboard. There were steps, something called as requirement analysis, design, coding, unit testing, something called as testing, deployment, and maintenance. So you'll find out, obviously, based on which course you have enrolled for, they can be some technical things, they can be simple, so-called, you can say, software development thing. So you'll find out, all of you are from different courses, I believe. So obviously, based on your courses, you'll find out, the further guideline can be, offered. Are Java concepts covered in videos enough? I guess yes. Those are covered, enough. What are the good tools for wireframing? So you will find out, for wireframes, you can use mind map. Okay, that is something which at least I use in my company. So that will help you. Or you can use any kind of, you can say, designing tool for that matter, which means people also use what we call as Dreamweaver as well, rather Photoshop as well for wireframing. So I've seen that. Okay. Can HTML and Bootstrap be done in IntelliJ? Yes, yes. IntelliJ can give you what we call as intelligence based on some extension installation. So yes, you can get HTML and Bootstrap. It can be done in IntelliJ. No issues in that. Okay, great. So hopefully I can say I did give, I can say, most of you the answers, and it's good to close at this, you can see, a correct node. So are we good to close, guys? Just raise your hand instead of saying yes or something. Just raise your hand. That will be sufficient. Okay. Thank you very much, guys, for your time. Uh, this session, Prakar, started at 10. So maybe what you will have to do is, if you are for 12 o'clock session, you'll have to wait. 12 o'clock session is yet to start. So, okay, guys, that's it for the day. Thank you very much. Have a good day.